So I've been sent my first Anycubic printer. They very kindly reached out to me and asked did I want to try out the brand new Photon Mono M5S, and I said yes, I definitely do. So this isn't a sponsored video, but they did send me this free of charge, so just bear that in mind when I go through it. And this is just to give my first initial impressions about what it's like for miniature printing. So first up, I'll get this unboxed, then I'll come back to you with some impressions and some B-roll and all of that jazz. There we go, so that's pretty much the vast majority of bits all unboxed. So this printer is going to be a 10-inch build plate here. We've got a 12K display as well, so I'll be interested to see what the quality is like for that. We'll see a nice big vat there as well to be able to get all your resin into, so that way you can print off lots of different things. Now, one interesting thing about this is it's meant to be auto bed leveling, so you don't have to worry about that. And that's, for me, that's massive. I really like that feature. To be honest, it's not too much of an issue. Once you manually level your bed and everything else, it's not too bad of an issue, but it is nice because just not having to worry about that hassle and have the machine do it all for you, that's a big win. It also has connectivity as well, so I can hook it up to my phone and that way check on my print and stuff like that, which is always nice. And all in all, it looks like a decent, nice, robust machine as well. I've only just unboxed it, so I'm not too sure what it's going to be like. Apparently, it is very fast as well, so I'm looking forward to testing that out. But now, I need to get this set up and do a few test prints. So getting this printer put together and set up was actually really, really easy. It's a nice solid build and it's got a lot of good stuff going for it. Now, one of the big things that they advertise about this printer is that it has auto bed leveling. And when I saw that, I was pretty stoked just because bed leveling is a bit of a pain in the bum for a lot of people. And it's one of those things, if you don't get it right, then everything else from that point on is just going to keep failing. So it's nice to have that included. And I'm glad to say that it worked. And you never know, it could just be that it was calibrated from the factory and it worked just like that. But my experience so far was that I plugged it all in, got some resin in the vat, got a print onto a USB stick, and it printed it without having to do any leveling, which is a really nice touch. Another feature of this printer is that it also has like failure detections. But if something's gone wrong with the print, it basically detects that and it will alert you, which is a nice touch. And I experienced this pretty much right off the bat. I did turn it off because I found that it was giving me quite a few false errors. So it was popping up on the screen saying it's no longer detecting much suction between the FEP and the build plate. So as it's rising, it's not detecting much suction, but it did that with pretty much every single print. So I ended up turning it off and moved on from there. But it is nice to have. And if they can tune that in with some software and make sure that it really detects it well, then again, that'd be a really nice inclusion. Now, before we dive into the nitty gritty, there are other options as well. So this currently retails for around about £339. And for about 120 more, you can also get their Pro version. And the difference between this is you get a slightly... Oh, that's awkward. So for about £120 more than the standard M5S, you can get the Pro. And the major difference between that is screen resolution. So you go from 12K to 14K. And also as well, it has a built-in heater and air purifier. How much that will work for you, I'm not too sure. But if you only have one single printer, and you don't already have like a dedicated enclosure or way of heating up like multiple printers, then it might be a worthwhile investment just because heating can be a bit of a pain and it's nice to have that extra. Moving on though, let's talk about this particular machine and how I found it and some of the things I really liked and some of the things that just I didn't like as much. So like I mentioned, it's a really nice solid build. It looks nice, it feels nice. Everything about it is what you'd expect from a Resin 3D printer. One really nice inclusion is it has built-in Wi-Fi network connectivity, and setting it up to my Wi-Fi was actually really easy. You just download the application, scan the QR code and all the bits that come up on the screen and follow the instructions there. And it took me about 5 to 10 minutes before I'd done this thing. Done a few updates on the machine, and then I was ready to go. Now, in this space where I've got my 3D printers, I use a Wi-Fi extender so I can get internet connectivity from the house through to the garage out here. And I was surprised to find that it just worked perfectly. There were no issues. So when I was in the house, I could monitor my prints, see how much longer I've got to go, if they're finished and all of that jazz. And it all worked. So, you know, if you are in that similar sort of setup where you've got your printing outside or somewhere else and you're using some kind of Wi-Fi extender, it works, which is a nice big bonus. All in all, the user interface was really just kind of straightforward and easy to follow. The touchscreen on the front is nice and responsive. It's nothing special. It's not going to like blow your socks off or anything, but it's easy to use, easy to follow, and just nice and responsive. The lid is a standard lid where you basically pop it off and pop it back on. I have grown accustomed and I really like the hinge lids, which you kind of push up and over and then they slide back down. But that's a complete preference thing. All of my stuff's in a grow tent anyway, so I take the lids off and put them in storage because I just don't need them anymore. But I do prefer that sort of style. But again, like I said, that's purely preference and I should probably stop doing this now. It's got a nice big vat, which will store lots of resin. And one thing that I quite liked about it was it seemed to have like pour spouts from all the different corners on it, which is nice to have. Some printers have like none in their vat, so when you go to pour out that resin, like if you're filtering it or if you're changing your resins, it kind of pours from the corner and then it goes along the side and it just makes an absolute mess. This has like little bits on the side, so that way if you pour it, it goes nice and cleanly, so you don't make so much of a mess, which is always a nice to have. The only thing that I don't like about the build quality, or just the build in general, is that the USB stick is on the side of the printer. Again, an absolute preference thing here. But if you've got multiple printers, or if you have a printer and then like a wash and cure station or anything like that, it's nice to be able to put everything quite compact and up against each other, because resin 3D printing can take up a lot of space. I prefer having them on the front. Having them on the back is stupid, although again, I understand why some people would like that, but having on the front makes it easy to access that USB port, and it means that you can put multiple machines alongside each other. Having it on the side, it's not my favorite thing, but completely a preference thing. I know some people like that. So we'll move quickly past that one. Along with the USB stick, another thing that I didn't like is it's quite loud. And I don't mean like the moving parts or anything. That's not loud. It's not like one of my other machines that I had in the past that sounded like a dying whale. The fan is really loud. And it's louder than the little fan heater that I've got in my grow tent as well, which I found really weird. Could be that I've got a faulty fan in there, but I don't think so. It doesn't sound faulty, it just sounds like quite a loud fan. It's not the end of the world, because realistically, for safety purposes, you shouldn't be near a Resin 3D printer when it's printing, because it's giving off fumes and all of that stuff. And even with the best ventilation or purification or anything else that you're doing, ideally you shouldn't be near it when it's printing. So it shouldn't be a con, because you shouldn't be near it. But I'll get off my judgmental high horse now. But safety first, people, especially when you're using Resin 3D printers. But the big question is, how does it print miniatures? And it prints them pretty well. So all these prints are ranging from 2.2 second exposure time up to 2.8. And I found that my sweet spot when it came to all this testing was around about 2.8 seconds exposure time. I was having a bit of a play around with that. Now, I don't know if it's a silly thing to do, but I tend to do all of my test prints with actual miniatures that I'm going to be printing. You can do all the calibration prints and stuff like that, and they do make a lot of sense to do, especially if you're not too sure what you're looking for, because they can really help you to dial in your settings and find what it is. But I've always found that sometimes you can get the most perfect calibration print, but then when you come on to doing things that have supports and they're larger and stuff like that, that's when you start to experience some of those failures. So I figured, why not actually try it? And I used this Angel by Manufactory a whole load, and I ended up with 2 failures before I got to my perfect one. But I also used a whole bunch of other stuff as well throughout this, just to kind of give me an idea of if I'm going from like super duper small epic scale miniatures, how do they print, through to like your standard tabletop miniature size as well, and then like your larger prints like this corrupted Gladiator and also this Angel, just to kind of give me an idea of how things were going. So like I mentioned, I started off at around about 2.2 second exposure time and gradually worked my way up through that. I found that the larger prints were the things that were failing more often, which is to be expected. Obviously they're heavier, there's going to be more suction there, and once they were getting towards the end, especially this Angel around the wings, for example, that's where I started to have some failures. With this corrupted Gladiator by Station Forge, I think he's got something from every single test print on him. So I think it was the head that failed at 2.2 seconds, the arms were failing around about 2.4 seconds, and as I was working my way up, I was getting more successful prints. So you will notice when I do some of the B-roll for some of these things, there'll be some like weird lines, some of the bits don't fit together perfectly, especially on this Gladiator. And that's because I wanted to show you guys the results I was getting right from the start as I worked my way up to actually getting some better settings. And the reason I'm doing that is because as a YouTuber, or YouTube channels in general, it's really easy to brush aside all of those steps you've actually got to go through before you get to good prints. So I figured I'd show you what that looks like, and even in, I suppose, the worst settings that I was using, I still managed to get some pretty usable results. So I worked my way through these and I ended up with some decent looking things. Honestly, the detail on these looks fantastic. When it comes to resolution and all of that jazz, in my opinion anyway, once you go from 4K up, you're going to get fantastic looking prints on tabletop miniatures. There's just, the resolution already looks great. So when we start getting numbers thrown around like 8K, 10K, 12K, it's kind of not going to make a huge difference, but it is nice to have, having that little bit extra resolution. It just means that they're doing something in the background there. But realistically, you can ignore all of those marketing gimmicks. It's down to the actual results that you see in front of you. These look fantastic. So I wanted to do a whole range of them, so I've got the bigger things here. But I also did these which would fit with like Legions Imperialis or Epic Scale. And these are by a creator called KMFP. kill me for prizes, and it does amazing stuff if you're into Legions Imperialis especially, or just that really small scale thing. The quality on these is great, and it's kind of what I'd expect from this sort of printer. They all came off looking fantastic. There's loads of detail despite them being absolutely tiny. You will have noticed with all of these as well, just so I can show off some of the detail a little bit more on camera, I've taken a few shots of them before I've primed them, so you can see what they look like when they've come off the printer. But for most of these, I primed them all in black, gave them all a little bit of blast of white, and some of them I added some extra color on there as well, just to give them a basic airbrushing. And I wanted to do that just so that way my camera could capture the quality better, because when it's just that light mid-gray type thing, you don't really see much on camera, at least in my opinion. So it's nice to see what they look like with paint on. And realistically, if you're watching my kind of opinion on a 3D printer, it's going to be related to tabletop miniatures, which is probably why you're watching it. And if you're watching that, it means that you're probably going to prime your miniatures. You might never paint them like pretty much everybody else, but we do like to at least prime them and hope that one day we will paint them as well. So even with some paint on there, you get some fantastic detail. So those epic scale ones came out really well. And then I moved on to some other types of things. So I've got these by Station Forge, these like Imperial Guard type things, and they look amazing. The trench coat and everything looks fantastic. He's got this little chain blade. All the detail on like his gas mask and like the piping that comes off of it all stands out really, really nicely. I'm really impressed with the way those came out. And also as well by Station Forge, because they just keep making so much amazing sci-fi stuff at the moment. They've gone to this like Gene Stealer cults type stuff. Again, looks amazing. It's got this big old brainy head. And there's so much detail on there, and you can just see all of the little bits and stuff like that. Looks fantastic. And then they've got this like chaplain as well. He's holding his little staff there, and like the Aquila that's coming off the skull, so you can really see all of that detail. And everything just really stands out, and it's exactly what I expect from a printer like this. So very impressed with that. I also did this little goblin by Highlands Miniatures, and although he was successful, I wasn't successful in getting him to the house without losing a hand. I have no idea what I did with his hand. But again, this looks great. All the detail around the face. He's got this hat with this like kind of fur bit around the top of it, and you can really pick out that detail there. Nice amount of detail, like his armor and stuff like that. There's a decent amount of depth. It's not lost any of that. Everything came out very nicely with that one. And then also as well, I've got this like Emperor's Children proxy, and these are absolutely fantastic. I got a whole bunch of these recently. I painted up one and then haven't got around to doing the rest of them, but I will do. And I also have the name of the creator up on screen, so you can see that. But a lot of detail on this one as well. You can see all of that. It's come out very nicely on the print, even with a couple of layers of paint over the top of it. Everything's still really clear, really crisp, and just really impressive. And then we move on to the bigger beasties. So I will start off with this Corrupted Gladiator. This is printed in multiple parts. Like I mentioned, I think it's had a part from every single exposure time, just because different bits of it failed, depending on what I was doing. And because of that, it hasn't fit together perfectly, because there's like some layer shifting and stuff like that, especially on the body, which means that it doesn't quite line up. However, it still looks amazing. And one thing that I was really interested in seeing, especially when it came down to bigger models like this, because there's a lot of flat surface on, even though he's a really muscly man, or beast, or whatever that's meant to be, those muscles are quite flat and smooth. And I can't really see any layer lines, and the camera will pick them up because that's just what it does. But on a print like this with a lot of flat surfaces, you're not really seeing that many layer lines, which is really nice to see. And I think, again, that's a testament to where we are in the quality of 3D printing at the moment. You're just not seeing that on there. There's a lot going for this model. There's a couple of areas that didn't come out as nicely as I wished. One of them is the right-hand face, and I don't know what happened with that. I think it's slightly fallen off the support, and I don't know if this is just that the supports made by Station Forge aren't that good on that head, because that head failed on every single exposure test up until I got to 2.8 seconds, and even at 2.8 it doesn't look fantastic. I think it's shifted slightly, and it means that the teeth have almost merged with the front of it. Apart from that though, a really nice print. There's a lot of detail on there. And like I mentioned, the layer lines aren't noticeable, at least to the naked eye. And then we move on to this Angel, and this is by Mammoth Factory Games, and this came out beautifully. Now this prints off in one part, and I wanted to test doing obviously something that's quite big in multiple parts to see how that would come off, but also something that was quite big that came off in just one single part. Now it's not the biggest thing in the world, but it's still pretty big, detailed, there's a lot going for it, and it came out perfectly this time. This again is one of those that I tested out a few times. So at the original settings that I was doing it, I think I started at 2.4 seconds with this one and had a failure. Then it failed again at 2.6 seconds, came out slightly better, but it still failed. And then at 2.8, it came out really, really nicely. The detail on the wings is just beautiful. There's so much going for this. And the one thing that looks really nice on this is the detail on the fabric. And that might sound silly, but it's just because that sometimes when you take a sculpt like this that is maybe overly detailed, it doesn't necessarily translate that well on a printer because you start getting some bits that are overexposed, or you just don't have the capability from the printer to actually pull off some of the detail that's been done in the digital sculpting. But in this, that detail that's within that fabric has really come out very, very nicely. All the chains look good, everything's come out nice and cleanly. And although you can't necessarily see it, there's not that many flat panels or anything like this on this one. I'm not seeing any layer lines as I look through this. He's got this nice kind of ribbed armor. Sounded really weird to say, but all this, and that has a lot of flat panels. And the sword, for example, and I can't see any layer lines. Again, the camera will absolutely prove me wrong because it will just capture better quality than my eyes can see, which makes me sound blind, but I'm not. And anybody picking this up will probably look and not be able to tell that it's 3D printed. And you know, this isn't necessarily just an Anycubic thing. This is just where we're at with 3D printers now. You get some fantastic detail from these. So all in all, after doing all of these prints and everything, you know, like I mentioned, this is just my first impressions, my initial impressions of it. I will do a full review a little bit longer down the line. I want to be able to use it for a lot longer. I've never used an Anycubic product before today either. So I wanted to be able to figure it all out and just see what the quirks are, because there will be things, no doubt, that will go wrong with it. So I want to figure out how easy is it to replace things like the FEP and getting replacement parts and all of that stuff before I can say, yes, you absolutely should buy this printer. But initial impressions are really positive of this. And at this price point, it's really hard to argue with. There is competition out there, of course. There's plenty of other brands as well. So if you're in the market for something, there's a lot of choice to go with. But at the moment, for £339 to get a decent mid-sized machine that prints off in this quality and prints off pretty fast as well. That's one thing that I haven't mentioned so far because I don't normally care about speed. And the reason I don't care about speed is I'd rather go for quality and successful prints over speed. But it is fast. It's faster than any of the other machines that I've used before. I can't give you numbers because I don't have any comparisons that I can write down, but anecdotally, it is faster than other machines I've used. So all in all, at that price point, it's got a lot going for it. It's got good connectivity. It also has an app that works, which is always nice. And it prints off in fantastic quality if you're looking to do stuff for tabletop miniatures. It's definitely worthwhile having a look at. There's nothing really here that stood out to me saying, actually, don't buy this. So yeah, definitely have a look at it. It's well and truly worthwhile. So big thanks to Anycubic for sending me the M5S to test out. It's a very nice machine. It's easy to set up. It's not completely plug and play because you still will need to do those exposure tests to find the right settings that work for your machine, your environment that you're in as well, and also the resin that you're using. But it was very, very close to being a plug and play machine. And I think that might be the closest I've been to any new printer setup where I could have almost gone and just got a file and printed it. So hats off to them. It's a very, very nice machine. So let me know if you've got any questions. Throw them down in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. And if you want to ask any more questions to discuss all things like 3D printing and painting and all of that stuff, head over to my Discord channel where we talk about all that stuff. So thanks for watching. Hit that like and subscribe button. Come along for some more content in the future and I will see you soon. Ta-ra for now. Bye.